Welcome everyone to our Inside the Box lecture series. Just a reminder, our subject this semester is about sitting inside the box. And today we have someone very special who will be speaking to you, Joyce Lin, and I would like to give you her bio. Joyce Lin is an artist and designer who utilizes a variety of mediums, including wood, foam, plastics, and found objects, often warping and deconstructing furniture archetypes in what some have described as forensic making. Joyce grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, where she attended the Alabama School of Fine Arts. Her cross-disciplinary interests led her to attend the Brown-RISD dual degree program, one of the hardest programs to get into in the country, where she earned degrees in furniture design at the Rhode Island School of Design and studied geology, biology at Brown University in 2017. She has since completed an artist residency at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, exhibited in several cities, including Houston and New York, and has work included in collections around the country, including the RISD Museum in Providence, Rhode Island, which is wonderful. Her studio is currently based in Houston, that she's speaking to us from there, where she also teaches and manages a wood shop at the nonprofit makerspace TXRX Labs. And I have to say, I've known Joyce for 9 years. And I remember when she first started studying furniture design. But frankly, the reason I remember Joyce is that I ended up just loving this chair that she did that I saw in a student show. And I don't know if that's the one that's in their permanent collection, but it's a chair made with plexiglass and wood chair parts on the inside of it. And I'll never forget that chair. We even have a picture of it hanging up in our low-tech lab here on our floor. So I've watched Joyce grow. I've watched her become the artist she is. So I am just so delighted to present her to you and hand it over to you, Joyce.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Thank you for that, wonderful introduction. And, of course, thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be able to, talk and share my work and share my thoughts with everyone. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so can everyone see that?
Yes.
Looks great.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. Again, as Carol said, my name is Joyce Lin, and I am an artist, designer, currently based in Houston, Texas, where I also run the wood shop at TXRX Labs, which is nonprofit makerspace. So I sort of maintain the equipment, teach classes, and do kind of everything wood shop related. So we're kind of a really large makerspace. I think now we're actually the largest in the country with a 300,000 square foot warehouse space. So anyways, so my first slide. So I've titled this talk, Exploring Objecthood, sort of almost for lack of a better term for what I've been doing for the past several years. So I mostly make one-off sculptures and small batch production furniture that kind of lies in this realm between furniture and sculpture. So while my work is fairly diverse in medium and process, it's really it's kind of centered around this idea of exploring objecthood, that is what it means to exist in material space, not just as an object, but also our environment, us as people, all of that. So I kind of see my work as a record of my journey as an artist and designer, sort of learning to be a maker in this very rapidly changing material and technological environment. So I've decided to structure my talk in chronological order for that reason. So just a little bit about background about me. So I was born in Durham, North Carolina, to a very scientific family. My parents are both immigrants from Taiwan, and they both work in the biomedical research field. They're both cancer researchers. But from very early on, I gravitated towards art. I think I was maybe like 5 or 6 years old when I first said that I wanted to be an artist, and honestly, it hasn't really changed since then. I've just kind of kept going. But very early on, we moved from Durham, North Carolina to Birmingham, Alabama, where I ended up attending the Alabama School of Fine Arts, which is a public magnet high school where you kind of decide a concentration. So, visual arts, music, creative writing, all of that. So I obviously I chose visual arts. But basically, it's the school is sort of modeled after a college art program. That is, you start off with your foundations, so drawing, painting, design principles, some sculpture, and then your last 2 years you focus on building your body of thesis work. So my thesis, I sort of did it in kinetic sculpture. So I kind of already had this body of work that I was building off of when I applied to college. So and I settled on the Brown RISD dual degree program because I was sort of, after 6 years of art school, I kind of wanted something to draw from for my art. I really do believe that as artists, we always need to draw from somewhere, whether it be our own personal experience and our background, something that we're passionate or interested in and whatnot. I think artists are they're like sponges, like we're kind of meant to react to our environment in that way. So when I first went into RISD, this is kind of what so these kinetic sculptures are kind of these mechanical gears made of actually just popsicle sticks and hot glue. But I was sort of fascinated by this idea that our outer appearance is a manifestation of an inner structure system, and this idea of this dialogue between material and function and form. And I really just love the challenge of working in 3 dimensions. So that's kind of why I ended up in furniture design at RISD and geology biology at Brown, because both fields sort of deal with this idea in this very hands-on way. And it's almost like designing through problem solving. So for example, in furniture, you start off with woodworking, which is a lot about learning the rules of your material. So learning about the grain direction, how to work with the material. So although I didn't really set out to make functional design objects, I was still very much drawn to more sculptural, conceptual work. I was sort of drawn to their emphasis on craft and making things well. So meanwhile, at Brown University, in their earth science department, you're basically learning how literally everything is made, and how everything works. It's 13.5 billion years of history, working in both 3 dimensions and 4 dimensions. So my professor used to say, geology is like a forensic science, in that you're reading the features of your environment, taking the clues and working backwards to piece together this deeper story of where we come from, who we are, and how we're all intertwined. So for example, this is a photo taken during one of my field trips with the geology department. So this location is called the Whaleback Anticline, and in a town called Shamokin, Pennsylvania, which is a small coal mining town where it was in the past. And it's a famous example of ductile deformation, which is the folding of rock layers, sort of like pushing together a rug. So you have these folds, and this occurs deep underground. About 30 kilometers underground is when it starts to move fluidly. And then the whole thing was uplifted and then exposed over time after the overlying coal was mined. So then these kind of mounds are the thing that's left. But anyways, this is sort of evidence of the collision of the North American and African continental plates that form the Appalachian Mountains and also the Pangaean supercontinent about circa 300 million years ago. So you can kind of see there's a cross section of what this would look like on the side, and then a map, so you can kind of see like where exactly this occurred. But anyways, you go there and you see it. You can see it, feel it. It's not just theory or renderings on a computer screen, and that's kind of what made it so impactful to me. So I think this kind of contributed to this fluid way that I view objects. This idea that everything is in motion from one state to the next, even something like rocks. And then this idea that everything can be taken apart and dissected and understood. But although I think I wanted to make furniture or sculpture work that, expressed this feeling of interconnectedness, there was a point during my time in college where I did sort of hit this wall. And I think this coincided with a move from woodworking to learning about other materials and processes, like, for example, metalworking, plastics, foam, resin, and these other more highly engineered materials and processes where you're almost making things using materials as a means to an end, rather than this back and forth dialogue that I learned before. And I think, as artists and makers, we live in this very fabricated world where, things don't always make sense, and oftentimes there's this disconnection between truth and appearance. So this is a photo taken at a man-made lake in the suburbs right outside of Houston. So this is concrete boulders. So they're fake boulders just made to look like rock. And then these are plastic 2x4s that create this dock that sticks out into the man-made lake. So, you have the grains cast into that plastic. So technically these are design objects. And it's just kind of this funny appropriation of, the aesthetics of nature and structure. That's, it's kind of funny, but also a little bit dark. So I was just kind of drawn to this bizarre duality. So all of these and other things in my life contributed to this more fundamental curiosity about the world and my role as a maker. So I feel that my work became driven not only by this feeling of wonderment, but then also this, also anxiety, horror, humor, fascination, sort of these more complex emotions that I think were more true to how I felt. So this is the first chair that I made during my senior year for our chair assignment. So this is titled Negative Chair, and it is made of vacuum formed plastic sheets, PETG, over molds. So I used 5 molds, and then the pieces are stitched together with monofilament fishing line, basically. So you can kind of see here's a video of the process of vacuum forming over a mold. All this is for actually a separate project. And now with this project, I was sort of thinking about this idea of delineating a bubble, delineating the space around a chair form. And what I was thinking of these ubiquitous objects that lack a clear origin or context. Sort of like this common plastic lawn chair titled the Monoblock Chair, and it's an injection molded polypropylene chair that is now, it's commonly known as like the most common plastic chair in the world. Because it's about $350 to produce, and it's famous for achieving a quote unquote cultural global ubiquity, according to social theorists, and it quote unquote offers no clue about where or when you are. And the designer, it's produced by all different companies. The designer actually designed it before he had the technology to produce it. So then later on, the companies came back in and then produced it based on this design. But anyways, this is kind of what I was thinking when I designed this chair. It's, and looking back, it's almost like the antithesis of everything that I'd done in the past. So next one. So then this is the second chair that I made during that year. And it's now the chair that I'm most well known for the reason that, it's been shared all over the internet actually. So this piece kind of just keeps coming back, throughout my career. So it's maple wood chair parts that I've constructed, built on a lathe and with a wood shop, and then I encased it in clear acrylic plexiglass. So the parts will shift around. If you pick up the chair and kind of shake it, the parts will kind of shift around every time it's moved. So it's always kind of in a different state. And I wanted to evoke this fear again, this feeling of literal disconnection. So this piece in 2019, I ended up exhibiting this in R & Company in New York City, which is a high-end design gallery. And I did a limited edition of 8 of these chairs. So yes, one of these chairs was acquired by the RISD Museum right after that show. And then one more recently was acquired by the Houston Civic Art Collection for their airports. So I think eventually, this will be exhibited in one of their two main airports. So then this is the last chair that I made that year, right before graduation. So this one is titled Fused Chair. So this is made of 5 different dining chairs, sort of cut apart, glued and nailed together. So I sort of disassembled it and cut them into smaller fragments until it sort of transitions into this very smooth seat at the top. So at this time, I was sort of thinking about destruction and repaving and erasure by this opaque white surface, which in some ways might symbolize, cleanliness, earth, minimalism. But for me, it's like more of a destructive force as a maker to sort of cover over these previous chairs. And I actually found during this process that destroying objects is actually kind of a release for me. I really quite enjoyed it. And I made other objects during this year, but I kind of realized that chairs are almost like this perfect scaffold for the ideas that I have, because they're relatable. One of my professors used to say, furniture is 1 degree removed from the human body, which makes a lot. It kind of makes sense because even the way we describe chairs is very human-like. Chairs having a back, a seat, legs. So even the way we describe it is very relatable in that way. So after I graduated in 2017, there was kind of a half a year where I waffled around a little bit, and I was kind of struggling to make work without a shop because I hadn't gotten my job yet. So naturally, I kind of gravitated towards found furniture, which is I think is a common thing that happens with people who graduate furniture departments and they don't have a shop left. So this piece to the left is titled Fluffy Furniture. So this is found furniture, and then that has been completely upholstered, all with hand tools. So I really just kind of used, the foam and the fabric to sort of exaggerate the forms underneath. And for me, it was more just kind of getting my hand, getting my hands dirty and sort of getting this rhythm of making again. Same thing with this chair to the right, titled X Chair. It's also, found chair that's been deconstructed and kind of collapsed into the middle with spray foam, kind of expressing this feeling of pure destruction. So then, I got my job at the wood shop, and then about a few months after that, a fashion designer from a French Canadian fashion designer named Emeric Chachua who owns the fashion brand 3 Paradis, reached out to me and wanted to do a collaboration. So we kind of threw around some ideas, and we settled on this idea, this theme of dreams or nostalgia. So I proposed having antique furniture and encasing them in this blue frosted acrylic. So sort of this idea of the acrylic being more of, again, this destructive force, sort of blurring it and having objects fade away into the box. So this piece we exhibited in 2019, also in Houston. And then here are some detail shots. So this is a mirror where I polished the middle part of that acrylic so that kind of has this fogging effect. And then some details of the chair and table. Okay, so then this chair, this piece, I think was kind of the first piece going back to my main body of work. So this one is titled Skin Chair, and I finished this during my artist residency at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. So with this, I took an old, found piece of found chair, and I started peeling the surface layer off with a scroll saw and a bandsaw. So it's kind of layer by layer, almost like you're peeling an apple in the round. So you end up with hundreds of these really thin, almost veneer-like fragments, and I pieced them back together over a steel armature filled with epoxy clay as sort of this binder. So to the right is just the chair skins, and then inside is just clay and metal. And then to the right are the remnants, the inside quote unquote bones of the chair. So the result is almost this weird zombie of an object with the remnant parts hanging on the wall, like a skeleton on display, and then the skins themselves like sort of sitting on the ground. So it's almost like a taxidermy chair. So then here's some detail shots. You can kind of see it has this pattern on the seat that is more, again, an artifact of the process, with just the way that the seat scoops down. So everything in black is what was removed by the blade curve. So when you're peeling it layer by layer, then that's just all that gets removed, and you sort of end up with this interesting pattern. And then to the right, you kind of see like what the skins look like when they're freshly peeled off of a leg. So it's kind of continuing to push this idea of separating the insides and the outsides. So then this piece I also made during my residency at the Craft Center. So this is titled Egg Chair. And with this one, I was starting to think about cross sections. And I've always been sort of inspired by cross section diagrams, like what you'd see in like a science textbook. So it's kind of literally a form that is cut the seat in the back, so you have the innards exposed. So it's a CNC plywood armature, all the voids filled with spray insulation foam, like what you get at like any hardware store, and then filled, carved, filled, sanded, and then painted, and then placed plexiglass windows, for the back and the seats, so you can sit on it. So I really wanted to contrast sort of the unnatural off-white, pale yellowness of the spray foam with this very smooth, gloss white outer shell. So then jumping off of this idea of cross sections, or splitting things open, this is sort of the next piece that came out of that, which is titled Half Chair, where I'm literally I have two halves of seemingly one chair that are split into two separate chairs, obviously. But with this, it was also CNC'd ribs, and then that was nailed to a CNC'd outer surface. So this is when I really started getting into CNC work, especially being exposed to it more and more at my job as a woodshop manager. So again, it's kind of contrasting this inner sort of seeing the inner construction with this outer, very smooth, almost car-like surface. So I would say that while my forms are simple, I wouldn't call them minimal. I'd say that I'm more interested in essentialism, this feeling of optimizing impact by sort of paring it down to what's going to make the most powerful statement. So then this piece is titled Skin Table. So it's a continuation of the skin chair and sort of the skin series, because that chair sort of sparked an interest that I have now in display mounts and displaying things almost like a specimen. So I sort of continued that here. So it is an antique found walnut table where I have the skins just sort of hovering above the inner wood. So I used brass for the mounts, and it's all cold connection. It's all riveting, no soldering here. So this piece I also exhibited at Art & Company for their Objects USA show, which just recently came down. So I feel that throughout all this time, I've sort of been becoming more and more influenced by this growing internet aesthetic. I think I'll log onto Instagram and I'll see sort of this buffet of design objects, these crazy shapes and colors and materials, this feeling of like formlessness. And I've sort of seen this for years by designers like Misha Khan, Chris Schenk, Katie Stout, sort of large group of designers, emerging designers. But now I'm starting to see this spread, and it's kind of, I think it's driven obviously by the internet, but also the pandemic. This trash aesthetic, and it's sort of this trend towards a breakdown of rules and hierarchies, and I think it's sort of this rejection of craft in design pedagogy, reaction against mass production, minimalism, in favor of maximalism and imperfection. But I think the contradiction here is that it's also digitally designed, which is very interesting, because I'm seeing more and more objects that seem like they're no longer designed to be part of the physical world. Oftentimes you don't even know, you see an image, you don't even know if it's real or a rendering. But honestly, it's probably all painted resin covered foam. So part of me, I don't really quite know how I feel about it, because obviously I get it. I think it's liberating both as a viewer and as a creator to work with these materials in this in this liberating freeing way. But then at the same time, there's something almost I don't know, almost a little bit hedonistic, almost a little bit nihilistic in their use of materials, which I find like absolutely fascinating. So this is an image put by a group exhibition by Superhouse, which is also during the pandemic. So these are objects made by at least 50 different contemporary designers. So I feel that this has sort of influenced the work that I made during the darkest times of the pandemic. So this piece is titled 1-800-GET-PINK. And it's my first real fiberglass object. So this is stacked insulation foam, which is sort of this common sculpture carving material. So then I cut out sort of these plexiglass shapes, glued them on, and I fiberglass filled and then painted around it. And then I peeled off sort of the outer protective covering to sort of reveal these the exposed foam on the inside. So they almost look like open wounds in this bulbous metallic sort of artificial looking form. But I find that oftentimes when I aim for something that is this gives a natural feel, it often ends up to be, I think, looking quite beautiful. And then recently I did sort of a small production of these chairs, each with sort of a different variation on where the foam is exposed. But anyways, I think that the digital fabrication and the internet are sort of starting to weave their way into my work more and more. And then the last piece that I'll show, this is a piece titled Homegrown. So I made this for a temporary installation for the Richmond Avenue Sculpture Trail in Houston, Texas. So this is fiberglass and epoxy and dirt over a foam mold. So it's sort of this gritty transition from the gritty rough ground to sort of this smooth gloss black form, which is almost more like the Platonic ideal of furniture than anything else. So I've been really interested in working with dirt for a while, largely for this fascination where the ground kind of evokes this visceral reaction of fear and disgust, but at the same time I love the idea of it being this mysterious matrix of both birth and death, where things grow from it and then also die and decompose into it. So anyways, this piece was really just kind of dabbling in an outdoor furniture to see if I like it, which I kind of have mixed feelings about it. I think working in this scale was pretty difficult, but you learn some things every time. So then here's just my dad for scale. So this is just the installation site while as we were kind of putting it in. So it's installed in sort of this road median in between like these two busy roads, and they were still working on the landscaping at the time that we installed it. But anyways, okay. So to talk a little bit about process now. So I think my process is not too different from other artists and designers. Usually I'll start with sketches, sketch various different variations and iterations, and then I'll move on to material tests as sort of like a proof of concept. Maybe do some CAD drawings if I'm trying to nail down material cut list, all of that. Checking my budget, obviously, and then I just kind of dive right in. I don't often make like full scale prototypes. So each piece usually takes somewhere around 2 to 4 months, and I really know that I'm on the right path when everything lines up. That is, the form has to equal the material, has to equal the concept. They kind of all have to resonate with each other in order for the idea to work, I think. And then, obviously what's great about working at a makerspace is, that I learn new materials and new processes and things all the time, So this is a picture of the wood shop that we recently set up. So we have, CNC, we have metal shop, laser cutters, all of that. And it's all, feeding into my work. And, as I kind of learn and grow, I think, having access to equipment is obviously one of the, most essential parts of an art practice. So I think a makerspace is a great solution to, artists and designers who can't yet, afford this equipment. But anyways, a common question that I get is, how do I come up with ideas? And because on the outside, it might seem like I jump around quite a lot. It's true, I get bored quite easily. And usually once I've satisfied, my curiosity, I'll just kind of like move on to the next. But I've sort of been thinking of a couple analogies that might describe, the way that I think, and the way that I sort of structure my ideas. So the first is the tree analogy. So it's kind of this idea that everything, while it might look different on the outside, in the end, I think they're all connected, regardless of material and regardless of form, because they all come from a root source that is, me and my way of thinking. So again, which is to say, rather than a style that is a visual aesthetic, it is more about creating a way of thinking and a mode of thinking that ties everything together. And I think in the end, that's just a much more robust way of making work. So your ideas will naturally build on themselves and evolve and branch into other different ideas. And I feel like what this analogy allows me to do is it allows me to only purely aim for what's interesting and what's challenging. Because if I'm not learning something new every time, then where's the fun? Like where's the motivation? Like if I already know what it's going to look like, then I have no motivation to finish it, because what's the point? So I feel like with every project, it almost has to be aiming for the right proportion. That is, say 80% of it is known, and then 20% is unknown. So, and that 20% is like what I'm learning each time, and what's kind of pushing my work forward. So I think as an artist, it's really important to let yourself be surprised, and sort of live with a degree of uncertainty. At least that's how I feel, and because I almost think of art making like walking backwards. You don't know where you're going, and all you can see is where you've already been, but you know that you're moving forward regardless. So that's kind of how I think of my art practice, and maybe how I deal with the anxiety of not knowing what's coming next. And then the second analogy is what I'll call the fishing analogy, which is this idea of how you choose ideas to execute and realize, and sort of incubating your ideas over time. So I think of them almost like fish in a pond. That is, sometimes you get big fish right away, and you kind of recognize it immediately, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna make this project right now. But sometimes you're fishing for ideas. You get something that's too small and maybe not quite ready yet. So you have to decide, maybe I will let it go and just kind of throw it back in the pond to let it grow and incubate some more. Because sometimes there's sort of this nugget of an idea or a feeling that I want to express, but I don't have quite a material or form yet. So for me personally, I think it's fine, or at least I'm telling myself that it's fine to let ideas incubate in my pond while I gain some more experience, and to not disregard or discard small ideas, because they can come back and then grow or crossbreed and then come back in another form. For example, with the outdoor sculpture Homegrown, I've actually been thinking about that idea for years, but never really, it wasn't really until I realized that it has to be outside in an outdoor context for it to make sense, that I realized, okay, now I need to apply to have it as an outdoor installation, that this idea is actually going to make sense. But then, whereas with the chair 1-800-GET-PINK, the silver foam chair, that piece coming with that was almost instantaneous. But at the same time, it was more like putting form to this long-term feeling that I had. that I wanted to express. So in conclusion, I think it's a very interesting, very exciting time to be a maker and quote unquote explore objecthood. Because these days I feel like it almost feels like reality is crumbling around us a little bit with all these new materials and this blurring between the digital and the physical, and it's like, is it even relevant to make physical work anymore? But I think it very much is. I think that artists have more tools than ever to make their imagination a reality. But the question is, how do you process and how do you respond to it in a way that is true to you? So I oftentimes I'll get people that will come up to me and they'll say, they'll look at the exploded chair and they'll say like, wow, that piece, that chair is me, like that. I also feel like broken but still standing. And I think that's one of the best compliments that I can get as an artist and designer, because making that piece, I was feeling the same way. It's like, yeah, I also wanted to explore this feeling of this connection and evoke this sense of this state, this sort of ambiguous state of being not one or the other. So in the end, I think art is all about connection, human connection between people. So I think it's worth it to be honest about your thoughts and your feelings and how you're responding to all these changes that are occurring around us. Yeah, so that's my talk. So I'll open up to any questions.
Wow, Joyce, that was amazing and beautifully put together.